Jawaharlal Nehru, page 28. But I do not believe in any of these or other theories and assumptions as a matter of religious faith. They are just intellectual speculations in an unknown reason about which we know next to nothing. They do not affect my life, and whether they were proved right or wrong subsequently, they would make little difference to me. Spiritualism, with its sessions and its so called manifestations of spirits and the like, has always seemed to me a rather absurd and impertinent way of investigating psychic phenomena and the mysteries of the afterlife. Usually, it is something worse and is an exploitation of the emotions of some over credulous people who seek relief or escape from mental trouble. I do not deny the possibility of some of these psychic phenomena having a basis of truth, but the approach appears to me to be all wrong and the conclusion drawn from scarce and odd bits of evidence to be unjustified. Often, as I look at the world, I have a sense of mysteries, of unknown depths. The urge to understand it in so far as I can comes to me. To be in tune with it and to experience it in its fullness, but the way to that understanding seems to me essentially the way of science, the way of objective approach, though I realize that there can be no such thing as true objectiveness if the subjective element is unavoidable and inevitable. It should be conditioned as far as possible by the scientific method. What the mysterious is, I do not know. I do not call it God because God has come to mean much that I do not believe in. I find myself incapable of thinking of a deity or of any unknown supreme power in anthropomorphic terms, and the fact that many people think so is continually a source of surprise to me. Any idea of a personal God seems very odd to me. Intellectually, I can appreciate to some extent the conception of monism, and I have been attracted towards the Advaita non dualist philosophy of the Vedanta, though I do not presume to understand it in all its depth and intricacy, and I realize that merely an intellectual appreciation of such matters does not carry on far. At the same time, the Vedanta, as well as other similar approaches, rather frighten me with their vague, formless incursions into infinity. The diversity and fullness of nature steer me and produce a harmony of the spirit, and I can imagine myself feeling at home in the odd Indian or Greek, pagan, and pantheist atmosphere, but minus the conception of God or gods that was attached to it. Some kind of ethical approach to life has a strong appeal for me. Though it would be difficult for me to justify it logically, I have been attracted by Gandhiji's stress on right means, and I think one of these greatest contributions to our public life has been this emphasis. The idea is by no means new, but these applications of an ethical doctrine to large scale public activities was certainly noble. It is full of difficulty, and perhaps ends and means are not really separable but from together one organic whole. In a whole which thinks almost exclusively of ends and ignores means, this emphasis on means seems odd and remarkable. How far it has succeeded in India, I cannot say, but there is no doubt that it has created a deep and abiding impression on the minds of large members of people. A study of Marx and Lenin produced a powerful effect on my mind and helps me to see history and current affairs in a new light. The long chain of history and of social development appeared to have some meaning, some sequence, and the future lost some of its obscurity. 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 The practical achievements of the Soviet Union were also tremendously impressive. Often I disliked or did not understand some development there, and it seemed to me to be too closely concerned with the opportunism of the moment or the power politics of the day. But despite all these developments and possible distortion of the original passion of human betterment, I had no doubt that the Soviet Revolution Soviet Revolution had advanced human society by a great leap and had lit a bright flame which could not be smothered, and that it had laid the foundations for the new civilizations towards which the world could advance. I am too much of an individualist and believer in personal freedom to like overmuch rementation, yet it seemed to me obvious that in a complex social structure, individual freedom had to be limited, and perhaps the only way to read personal freedom was through some such limitations in the social sphere. The leisure liberties may often need limitations in the interest of the larger freedom. Much in the Marxist philosophical outlook I could accept without difficulty. Its monism and non duality of mind and matter, the dynamics of matter, and the dialectic of continuous change by evolution, as well as leap through action and interactions, cause and effect, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. It did not satisfy me completely, nor did it answer all the questions in my mind, and almost unawares a vague idealist approach would creep into my mind, something rather akin to Vedanta approach. It was not a difference between mind and matter, but rather of something that lay beyond the mind. Also, there was the background of ethics. I realized that moral approach is a changing on and depends upon the growing mind and an advancing civilization. It is continue. It is con- sorry. It is conditioned by the mental climate of the age. Yet there was something more to it than that. Certain basic urges which had greater permanence. I did not like the frequent divorce in communist as in others practice between actions and these basic urges or principle. So there was an odd mixture in my mind which I could not rationally explain or resolve. There was a general tendency not to think too much of those fundamental questions which appear to be beyond reach, but rather to concentrate on the problems of life, to understand in the narrower and more immediate sense what should be done and how, whatever ultimate reality may be, and whether we can vast possibilities of increasing human knowledge, even though this may be partly or largely subjective, and of applying this to the advancement and betterment of human living and social organization. There has been in the past, and there is to a lesser extent even today among some people, ab- as absorption in finding answer to the riddle of the universe. This leads them away from the individual and social problems of the day, and when they are unable to solve that riddle, they despair and turn to inaction and triviality, or find comfort in some dogmatic creed. Social evil, most of which are certainly capable of removal, are attributed to original sin, to the unalterableness of human nature, or the social structure, or in India to the inevitable legacy of previous births. Thus, one drifts away from even the attempt to think rationally and scientifically and takes refuge in irri- irrationalism, superstitious and unreasonable and inequitable social prejudice and practices. It is true that even rational and scientific thought does not always take us as far as we would like to go. There is an infinite number of factors and relations, all of which influence and determine events in varying degree. It is impossible to grasp all of them, but we can try to pick out the dominating forces at work, and by observing external material reality and by experiment and practice, trial and error, grope our way to ever widening knowledge and truth. For the purpose and within these limitations, the general Marxist approach fitting in as it more or less does with the present state of scientific knowledge seemed to me to offer considerable help. But even accepting that approach, the consequences that flow from it and the interpretation on past and present happening were by no means always clear. Marx's general analysis of social development seems to have been remarkably correct, and yet many developments took place later which did not fit in with his outlook for the immediate future. Lenin successfully adapted the Marxian thesis to some of these subsequent developments, and again since then further remarkable changes have taken place. The rise of fascism and Nazism and all that lay behind them, the very rapid of technology and the practical application of vast development in scientific knowledge are now changing the world picture with an amazing rapidity, leading to new problems. And so, while I accepted the fundamentals of socialist theory, I did not trouble myself about its numerous inner controversies. I had little patience with Lafayette's group in India, spending much of their energy in mutual conflict and recrimination over fine points of doctrine which did not interest me at all. Life is too complicated, and as far as we are understand it in our present state of knowledge, too illogical, for it is to be confined within the four corners of a fixed doctrine. The real problems for me remain problems of individual and social life, of harmonious living, of a proper balancing of an individual's inner and outer life, of an adjustment of the relations between individual and between groups, of a continuous becoming something better and higher of social development, of the ceaseless adventure of man. In the solution of these problems, the way of observation and precise knowledge and deliberate reasoning, according to the method of science, must be followed. This method may not always be applicable in our quest of truth, for art and poetry and certain physic experiments seems to belong to a different order of things, and to elude the objective method of science, let us therefore not rule out intuition and our other methods of sensing truth and reality. They are necessary even for the purposes of science, but always we must hold to our anchor of precise objective knowledge tested by reason, and even more so by experiment and practice. And always we must be aware of losing ourselves in a sea of speculation unconnected with the day-to-day problems of life and the needs of men and women. A living philosophy must answer the problems of today. It may be that we of this modern age, who so pride ourselves on the achievements of our times, are prisoners of our age, just as the ancient and the men and women of medieval time were prisoners of their respective ages. We may delude ourselves, as others have done before us, that our way of looking at things is the only right way leading to truth. We cannot escape from the prison or get rid entirely of that illusion, if illusion it is. Yet I am convinced that the methods and anything else in the long course of history and have opened doors and avenues of further and even more radical change, leading up to the very portal of what has long been considered the unknown. The technical achievements of science are obvious enough. Its capacity to transform an economy of scarcity into one of abundance is evident. Its invention of many problems which have so far been the monopoly of philosophy in becoming more pronounced. Space-time and the quantum theory utterly changed the picture of the physical world. More recent researches into the nature of matter, the structure of the atom, the transmutation of the element, and the transformation of electricity and light either into the other have carried human knowledge much further. Man no longer sees nature as something apart and distinct from himself. Human destiny appears to become a part of nature's rhythmic energy. All this upheaval of thoughts due to the advance of science has led scientists into a new reason. Verging on the metaphysical, they draw different and often contradictory conclusions. Some see in it a new unity, the antithesis of chance. Others, like Bertrand Russell, say philosophers ever since the time of Parmenides ever in the time of Parmenides have believed the world is unity. The most fundamental of my beliefs is that this is rubbish. Or again, man is the product of causes which had no prevision of the end they were achieving. His origin, his growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and beliefs are but the outcome of accident collections of atoms. And yet the latest development in physics have gone a long way to demonstrate a fundamental unity in nature. The belief that all things are made of a single substances is as old as thought itself, but ours is the generation who is first of all in history is able to receive the unity of nature, not as a baseless dogma or a hopeless aspiration, but a principle of science based on proof as sharp and clear as anything which is known. Old as this belief is in Asia and Europe, it is interesting to compare some of the latest conclusions of science with the fundamental ideas underlying the Advaita Vedantic theory. These ideas were that the universe is made of one substance whose form is perpetually changing, and further that the sum total of energies remains always the same. Also, that the explanations of things are to be found within their own nature, and that no external beings or existences are required to explain what is going on in the universe with its corollary of a self-evolving universe. It does not very much matter to science what this vague speculation leads to, for meanwhile it forgets ahead in 100 directions in its own precise experimental way of observation, widening the bounds of the chartered reason of knowledge and changing human life in the process. Science may be on the verge of discovering vital mysteries which yet may elude it, still it will go on along with appointed path where there is no end to its journeying. Ignoring for the moment the why, a philosophy science will go on asking how, and as it finds this all it gives greater content and meaning to life, and perhaps takes us some way to answering the why. Or perhaps we cannot cross the barrier and the mysterious will continue to remain the mysterious, and life with all its changes will still remain a bundle of good and evil, a succession of conflicts, a curious combination of incompatible and mutually hostile urges, or again, perhaps the very progress of science, unconnected with and isolated from normal moral discipline and ethical considerations, will lead to the concentration of power and the terrible instruments of destructions which it has made in the hands of evil and selfish men. seeking the domination of others and thus to the destruction of its own great achievements. Something of this kind we see happening now, and behind this war there lies the internal conflict of the spirit of man. How amazing is this spirit of man! In spite of innumerable failings, man throughout the ages has sacrificed his life and all he held dear for an ideal, for truth, for faith, for country and honor. That ideal may change, but that capacity for self sacrifice continues, and because of that, much may be forgiven to man, and it is impossible to lose hope for him. In the midst of disaster, he has not lost his dignity or his faith in the values he cherished. Plaything of nature's mighty forces, less than a speck of dust in this vast universe, he has hurled defiance at the elemental powers and with his mind's cradle of revolution shot to master them. Whatever gods there be, there is something godlike in man as there is something of a devil in him. The future is dark, uncertain, but we can see part of the way leading to it and can trend it with firm steps. Remember that nothing that can happen is likely to overcome the spirit of man which has survived so many perils. Remembering also that life, for all its ills, has joy and beauty, and that we can always wonder if we know how to in the enchanted woods of nature. What else is wisdom? What of man's endeavor or God's high grace, so lovely and so great? To stand from fear set free, to breathe and wait, to hold a hand uplifted over hate, and shall not loneliness be loved forever? And shall not loveliness be loved forever?